Good evening from Buckingham Palace, where President Trump's visit began this lunchtime. His helicopter Marine One landing here in the grounds, and where he's returning to tonight to be guest of honour at a state banquet. It's not the first time he's met the Queen, of course, but this time it's different. It is a state visit, the one he really wanted. But his focus on landing at Stansted this morning was not the royal family, but the Mayor of London. Just minutes before Air Force One landed, the US president tweeted that Sadiq Khan was a stone-cold loser, and he made a joke about his height. Our political correspondent Simon Harris on day one of Trump being back in town.
Even before he landed, President Trump was engaged in a new war of words with London's mayor. Minutes before Air Force One touched down at Stansted, Mr. Trump fired off his latest Twitter volley. Sadiq Khan has done a terrible job as Mayor of London, has been foolishly nasty to the visiting President of the United States. He is a stone-cold loser who should focus on crime in London, not me. But one Trump supporter was quick to blame the mayor, saying Sadiq Khan started it, with a newspaper article yesterday criticising the visit.
Sadiq Khan instigated this right before Donald Trump arrived. And I think it's very petty and short-sighted for Mr. Khan, and it seems to be that he's playing to his political base in London.
Giving the Chief Constable of Essex a hasty salute was an interesting take on the usual protocol, but American presidents rarely turn down the opportunity to practice their saluting skills. The spat between the president and the mayor wasn't the only thing that set this apart from other state visits. For a start, there was no open-top carriage procession along the Mall, an absolute no-no as far as the president's security team was concerned. Which is why most of the president's journeys around London won't be by car, let alone by tube, but by helicopter. Outside Buckingham Palace, all eyes turned skyward as Marine One made its approach. Although no one could be sure which helicopter was Marine One, because there's always two. One's got the president on board, the other's a decoy, just in case. It was Charles and Camilla who made up the welcoming party in the back garden after the shortest of flights from the American ambassador's residence in Regent's Park. But the Waleses were just the warm-up act. It's the Queen who's hosting the president and his family, throwing lunch to begin with, followed by a banquet later. While Mr. Trump inspected the Guard of Honour, it was hard not to spare a thought for the soldiers standing to attention in their self-heating headwear. Wisely, the women VIPs wore hats to deflect the worst of the rays. Things were also heating up beyond the palace walls.
Instead of spewing out the false narrative, you are ignorant. Don't touch me, don't touch me.
But most in the crowd seemed to welcome the president's visit. Most, but not all.
We should be polite. We shouldn't be rude. We should be polite. We may not agree with him and what he's doing, or we may not like him as an individual, but we shouldn't be rude.
What do you know about him?
He's a complete idiot.
You can't say that.
He's the president of our country, and the people voted him in, so they should be respectful of what he's doing and what his position is.
You hoping to see him?
I'd like it if I did, but if I don't, it doesn't matter, because I just want to be here to welcome him.
Why is a man from Croydon waving a re-elect Trump banner?
Because he's the man. We need someone like that here, instead of all these wusses we got.
I like Trump.
I'm a fan. Yeah.
After a private lunch, the President and Mrs. Trump were shown an exhibition of items from the royal collection. Down the road, police vans were blockading the approaches to Westminster Abbey, just one of many security measures ahead of the President's arrival. Leaving a wreath at the tomb of the unknown warrior was the sombre part of today, a far cry from the bad-tempered exchanges with the mayor.
We talk about this president being unpredictable, but actually that ongoing spat with Sadiq Khan, it's really no surprise, is it?
Oh, this is nothing new. There's no love lost between the two men. The feud's been going on for 4 years. It began when they were both running for office and Mr. Trump wanted to ban Muslims from visiting the United States. During last September's presidential visit to London, Sadiq Khan allowed protesters to float a balloon depicting Mr. Trump as a baby in a nappy, the so-called baby blimp. And then yesterday, he likened Mr. Trump's rabble-rousing to 20th century dictators, fascist dictators. In his tweets today, the president referred to Mr. Khan's height, saying he was shorter than the mayor of New York, another politician he doesn't rate. And we were expected to hear from the mayor today, but he cancelled his interview this afternoon. Perhaps he's calculated that he might appear the more statesmanlike of the two if he didn't respond. City Hall did respond, however. A spokesperson described Mr. Trump's tweets as childish insults which were beneath the President of the United States.
All right, Simon Harris, thank you. Good evening from Downing Street, where President Trump came today to talk politics with Theresa May. After his meeting with the outgoing Prime Minister here, he praised what he called Britain's extraordinary relationship with the US and dismissed the protests against him as fake news. But as ever, controversy was not far behind, and again today it was centred on his row with Sadiq Khan. London's Mayor Howe began the day by offering to meet the President, wanting, he said, to explain why he disagreed with his policies. Donald Trump's response was to call him a negative force who should not be criticising a president. With more, here's our political correspondent, Simon Harris.
Day 2 of the President's state visit and round 2 of his latest verbal punch-up with London's mayor. While Mr. and Mrs. Trump arrived in Downing Street to meet Mr. and Mrs. May, Sadiq Khan seemed to be ready for a truce. Do you think it's in the interests of relationships between London and America for you and the President to bury the hatchet, to end this feud?
Well, I'd hope so. Look, if he wants to put out the hand of friendship, I'm happy to put out the hand of friendship, and in a sort of fraternal way.
So far, so good. But hang on, there's a sting in the tail.
The context is this. He is the poster boy now of the far-right movement around the world.
The mayor wasn't about to change his opinion of the President, and it was clear Mr. Trump was still far from impressed with Mr. Khan.
I don't think he should be criticizing a representative of the United States that can do so much good for the United Kingdom. We talked about it before. He should be positive, not negative. He's a negative force, not a positive force. And if you look at what he said, he hurts the people of this great country.
The return of President Trump to London also saw the return of protesters and a comeback for the controversial blimp baby. It wasn't the only caricature. This was supposed to represent the President sitting on a toilet tweeting. Thousands of demonstrators converged on Westminster, hoping, if not to be seen by the President, at least to be heard by him.
It's raining, it's been miserable, but people have continued to protest against him.
Quite clearly he's very unpopular and no one likes him.
It's a working day, it's the middle of the day, and there's still packed out Parliament Square, Trafalgar Square. People are coming off work for this.
The biggest gathering was in Whitehall. Getting to the front of the crowd to hear the speeches wasn't easy. Unless, of course, you're Jeremy Corbyn and you're whisked in with the help of the police. The Labour leader was the star turn on the stage.
I'm very disappointed, particularly today on the wonderful festival of Eid, that our Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, has been attacked in the way that he has.
How much of this, if any, was heard inside Number 10, we can't be sure, but the President seemed to suggest there was no protest to speak of.
I heard that there were protests. I said, where are the protests? I don't see any protests. I did see a small protest today when I came, very small. So a lot of it is fake news, I hate to say.
But even he couldn't accuse the mainstream media of manufacturing his row with Sadiq Khan on a day when both men publicly slated each other once again. Simon Harris, ITV News.
Well, Simon Harris joins me now. Simon, let's go back to that ongoing spat between London's mayor and the President. You spoke to Sadiq Khan this morning. He said he would be prepared to meet with Donald Trump. Any chance of that actually happening?
Exactly. I said to him, if the President rang you up or somebody from his staff rang and said he'd like to have a meeting to try to end the truce, would you be prepared to talk to him? He said yes, he would, especially if he could show him around some of the communities in London that represent London's diversity. However, at the same time, he also referred to the President as the poster boy for the far right. The President called Sadiq Khan a negative force. I don't think there's any sign of a truce in the offing. As for Jeremy Corbyn, well, it seems he's also quite keen, despite boycotting last night's banquet at Buckingham Palace to have a meeting with Mr Khan. He was just down the end of Downing Street in Whitehall speaking while the President was in here. You got the impression that might be as close as he wanted to get to President Trump. But no, according to Mr Trump, Mr Corbyn's people asked for a meeting. Mr Trump turned that down. He too thinks Mr Corbyn is a negative force.
So what next for the President? He's got another day here. But is he going to be coming back to London any time soon?
Well, the President tonight is hosting a banquet at the Ambassador's House, Winfield House in Regent's Park. That's a return invitation after last night's one at Buckingham Palace. The Queen won't be there, but the Duke and Duchess of Cornwall will be. Tomorrow, he's out of London for most of the day at D-Day events in Portsmouth, but we'll be staying tonight in London, and we'll be back in London again tomorrow afternoon. But we next expect to see the President in London in December when he's here for a NATO summit. Again, expect more protests.
Yeah, we'll be doing this all over again. Simon, thank you. A coroner has concluded that the Love Island star Mike Thalassitis did kill himself. His body was found by a runner in a park in Edmonton in March. Outside the court today, his friend and fellow contestant, Montana Brown, asked people not to give up on his memory and for everyone to be a little bit nicer, a little bit kinder. Simon Harris reports.
Mike Thalassitis was known to millions of viewers. He appeared to wear his celebrity status with ease, but something was troubling him. In March, the former Love Island contestant hanged himself in a North London park after drinking and taking cocaine. His former co-star Montana Brown was in court to hear the coroner record a verdict of suicide.
What I will say is that I think when someone dies in this way that you don't give up on the memory, and I think a lot of people are scared to talk about it. But I think it's important to let his memory live on and to also remember the importance of why this happened.
But we may never know why it happened. At the park in Edmonton, a woman jogger discovered Mike Thalassitis' body hanging from a tree. Next to it, police found a black notebook, and in it were messages to his family. They weren't read out in court, but the coroner said Mr Thalassitis clearly set out his intention that his life should come to an end. His mum Shirley, dad Andy and brother Nick sat in the court in Barnet listening. Afterwards, his manager read out their statement.
Today's inquest concluded the sad news at the loss of our beautiful son and brother. We would respectfully request privacy at this time and digest what has happened to our family. Mike was a wonderful son and brother and will be dearly missed.
Montana Brown hopes kindness will be one legacy of her friend's death.
Like I said in my speech at his funeral, I think everyone should be a little bit nicer, a little bit kinder. It's such an awful world that we live in, so it's just nice to be nice. So I've definitely changed the way that I live my life, and I urge people to do the same.
Why do you think it happened?
I don't want to answer any other questions on that. I hope that's okay. Thank you very much.
If everybody was single, I still go for them too.
Before landing on Love Island, Mike Thalassitis was a professional footballer. But it's a measure of how instant fame changed him that the coroner decided today his official occupation was celebrity. The tragic reality TV star who found life too tough was remembered this week at the start of the latest series of Love Island. Simon Harris, ITV News, Barnet.
Good evening. She's been part of the makeup of London for almost 50 years. She sits on the Thames and welcomes visitors every day so she can tell her story. But today was slightly different. Today, HMS Belfast welcomed some special visitors, veterans from across the country, to hear her fire her great guns again, just like she did 75 years ago when she supported the D-Day landings in Normandy. The anniversary was marked with events in France, of course, but for some who couldn't make the trip, it was to the Thames that they came to pay their respects and to remember. And our correspondent Simon Harris is on the HMS Belfast for us tonight. Simon.
Charlene, 75 years ago, HMS Belfast was one of the largest warships in the D-Day invasion fleet. Her job was to sit off the coast of Normandy and fire her guns at German positions, in effect to soften up the enemy before the troops landed. She was in action for 10 days. And today, Belfast was once again a focal point for those who came to remember June the 6th, 1944.
Imagine how loud it must have been.
Unlike his granddaughter, John Nichols doesn't have to imagine. He remembers. Like HMS Belfast, he was also there 75 years ago. John was a 17-year-old gunner on HMS Argonaut when the ship headed for the Normandy beaches on the night before D-Day.
They said, well, we'll be going across the channel, leading the invasion forces about midnight. And by the time you get there, it's going to be about 5 o'clock in the morning. So what you're going to expect, we don't know.
John's ship was hit by enemy fire. His hearing was badly damaged. But he still made several trips in landing craft to a beach awash with bodies. What was it like?
Scary. You suddenly realise that what you're looking at, those guys, they didn't just lose their hearing like me, or half of it, they lost their life. And it is when you think of things like that you just don't think of them sort of once a year on certain days. You think of them many times throughout the year, and you never lose it.
It's just gobsmacking to know what they went through in the war and on D-Day, and yeah, just lucky to have him.
And you must be so proud on days like today.
So proud.
Oh, I get a kiss every day for it.
Yeah, he does. Yeah. Oh, no.
Today, HMS Belfast hosted a handful of D-Day veterans, all of them in their 90s. But this wasn't the only D-Day commemoration in London. At the Royal Hospital in Chelsea, Prince Harry wore his army uniform to meet pensioners and pay tribute to those who took part in the operation to liberate Europe.
On this 75th anniversary of D-Day, I can comfortably speak for everyone when I say we are honoured to be in the presence of 6 Normandy landing veterans.
Many of these veterans were given medals for their gallantry and heroism. Earlier this year, John Nichols, who's from Croydon, was finally awarded France's highest military medal. How proud are you?
Oh, we're very, very proud, very honoured, and say thank you to the French government.
I think they want to say thank you to you.
Yeah, well, possibly, yeah.
Like so many veterans, gallantry and modesty seem to be two sides of the same medal. Charlene, we all know the secrecy surrounding D-Day. The public and the Germans certainly couldn't know the invasion date. But talking to John Nichols today, I was struck by how little the troops knew. His ship, HMS Argonaut, was heading to Portsmouth from the Mediterranean. And they talked excitedly on board about catching the 814 from Portsmouth to London to have a long weekend with their families, who they hadn't seen for ages. But when they reached the Isle of Wight, they were told they were going to a place called Normandy for the invasion. And that, Charlene, was the end of their long weekend.
Indeed. Simon, thanks very much for that.